My wife gave me a DNA test at Christmas dinner. Surprise. Your son isn't yours. I'm taking half in the divorce. So I said to her, check your email. Her face went from cocky to terrified in seconds. That Christmas dinner was supposed to be perfect. Instead, my wife, Chloe, slid an envelope across the table, and the look in her eyes told me my entire life was about to shatter. We were surrounded by festive chaos, laughter, the smell of pine and cinnamon, her family all around. But for me, the air just went cold. Chloe pushed the envelope towards me, her red nails tapping against the paper, and her voice cut through the cheerful noise. Open it. This is your real Christmas present. The way she emphasized real made everyone pause, plates half eaten. Her mom thought it was something sweet. Her dad raised his glass, probably expecting big news, maybe a promotion, or another grandchild. I opened it slowly. The first thing I saw was the letterhead from a DNA testing lab. My hands went numb. The results were there, stark in clinical black and white. Leo, my 4-year-old son, the little guy who'd just fallen asleep upstairs after opening his gifts, the kid who called me daddy and hugged my leg every time I walked through the door. 0% probability of paternity. I read it twice, thinking there had to be a mistake, but the numbers didn't change. 0%. No margin for error. No. He wasn't mine. The table fell silent. Her mom just stared at the envelope in my hands. Sarah, Chloe's sister, stopped cutting her pie. Even the kids seemed to sense the sudden, heavy quiet. Chloe leaned back, took a sip of wine, and started talking before anyone could utter a word. She told everyone she'd stopped loving me 2 years ago. Just like that, out loud, casual as if commenting on the weather. Justin, my business partner and supposed best friend, had been giving her what I couldn't, she said. Stability. Emotional connection. Her mom's face went white. Her dad set his wineglass down with a thud that echoed in the silence. But Chloe kept going. What she said next was so cold, so calculated, I realized this public execution had been planned for a very long time. She'd waited for my tech startup to take off, waited for me to pour everything into building something valuable. Leo wasn't an accident, she declared. He was insurance. She'd gotten pregnant deliberately, put my name on the birth certificate, and waited. Waited while I worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificing everything to build financial security. Waited until the company was worth something real. And now, she was filing for divorce. She'd take half of everything I'd built, plus child support based on my new income, and walk away set for life. She even had lawyers lined up. She'd been documenting everything for months, building a case that I'd accepted parental responsibility. The courts wouldn't care about biology, she thought. In her mind, I was trapped. The law was on her side. She'd already won. Her mom started crying. Her dad looked at Chloe like she was a stranger. Sarah quickly gathered her children and took them to another room. But Chloe just sat there, waiting for me to break, to beg or cry or make a scene she could use against me. The strange thing? I didn't feel angry. Just this incredibly cold, clear certainty about what I needed to do next. Because here's what Chloe didn't know, I'd known about all of this for 6 months. Every detail of her plan, every move she thought she was making in secret. And while she was meticulously setting up her endgame, I'd been building my own case. Brick by brick, document by document. I looked across the table at this woman I'd once loved enough to promise forever to. I felt absolutely nothing. I set the DNA test down carefully, smoothing it out like it was just a receipt, and looked her dead in the eye. Check your email. For the first time that night, her confidence flickered. A tiny crack in her armor. She pulled out her phone with a confused frown, probably expecting some desperate message she could wave at her lawyer. Some angry rant, proof I was unstable. I watched her face as she opened her email. Watched the confidence drain away like a pulled plug. watched her eyes widen as she scrolled. The divorce petition my lawyer, David, had prepared, ready to file the moment she made her move. The detailed timeline of her affair, with evidence attached. The fraudulent paternity documentation. The recordings I'd been collecting for months. Every conversation where she'd mentioned her plan to Justin. Every text message she thought she'd deleted. Every piece of proof that this wasn't a marriage falling apart. It was a calculated con job from the start. Her hands started shaking. The phone almost slipped from her grasp. All the color drained from her face. Her dad leaned over, trying to see the screen. Her mom was asking what was happening, but Chloe couldn't speak. She just kept scrolling through page after page of evidence, watching her entire master plan collapse in real time. I stood up from the table. Her whole family was staring at me now. Some confused, some starting to understand. I looked down at Chloe one last time. Everything you just told everyone, I've known for 6 months. Every plan you made, every scheme you thought you were 10 steps ahead on, I was 20 steps ahead of you. And the second you announced your intent to file for divorce in front of witnesses, you gave me exactly what I needed to beat you to the courthouse. I walked out of that house, leaving her sitting there at her parents' Christmas table, surrounded by the family she'd just humiliated herself in front of, staring at her phone as her carefully constructed scheme fell apart. I got in my car, drove to the hotel I'd already booked, and called David. He was waiting for my signal. Within an hour, he'd filed everything electronically, the petition, the evidence, the emergency motion for temporary custody. By the time Chloe woke up the next morning, the legal machinery was already in motion. Because Chloe had made one critical miscalculation, she'd assumed I'd be too devastated, too heartbroken to fight back, too stupid to see what was happening until it was too late. She'd spent years underestimating me, treating me like I was just a wallet with legs. And that underestimation was going to cost her everything. The whole thing started 6 months before that Christmas dinner. It began because Leo got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad allergic reaction at preschool, but bad enough that his pediatrician wanted a full blood panel. I took him to the appointment because Chloe claimed she had a work meeting, which should have been my first warning sign. The nurse drew the blood. Leo handled it like a champ, and I took him for ice cream after. 2 days later, the pediatrician's office called and asked if I could come in to discuss the results in person. My stomach dropped. I showed up expecting to hear about some serious allergy, already mentally preparing for treatment plans. The doctor closed the door, her expression uncomfortable. She started by saying Leo was perfectly healthy, no major allergies, nothing to worry about. But then she paused. She told me that when they ran the blood panel, they noted Leo's blood type, type B positive. And according to their records, I was type O positive, and Chloe was type A positive. She explained very gently that it was genetically impossible for 2 parents with O and A blood types to have a child with type B blood. She said sometimes there are errors in records, but she wanted to bring it to my attention. I sat there, processing her words. The doctor wasn't accusing anyone. She was just pointing out a genetic impossibility and letting me draw my own conclusions. I thanked her and walked out to my car on autopilot. I didn't go home. I drove straight to a private lab across town, one that advertised discreet DNA testing for legal cases. I paid extra for expedited results. They said 72 hours. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions at home, playing with Leo, having dinner with Chloe, pretending everything was normal. The email arrived at 2 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and went into the bathroom to read the results. 0% probability of paternity. I read it multiple times, checking every number, looking for any sign this could be wrong. But DNA doesn't lie. Leo wasn't my biological son. I sat on that bathroom floor, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to wake Chloe up right then and demand answers. But a smarter part of me told me to wait, to be strategic, to find out exactly what I was dealing with before I made any moves. I lay there the rest of that night next to my wife and started thinking about all the little things I'd ignored. The way she'd discouraged genetic testing at birth. The comments about how much Leo looked like her side of the family. How she'd pushed me to work longer hours, focus on the business, leave parenting to her. How she'd insisted on keeping our finances mostly separate. How she'd asked me to sign papers updating our business structure, papers I'd barely glanced at because I trusted her. Every warning sign suddenly became blindingly obvious. The next morning, I called David Hale, the best divorce attorney in the city, a guy known for handling complex cases involving business assets and custody disputes. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me I needed to move very carefully. If Chloe was planning what he suspected, she'd likely been building her case for months. The fact that I'd been acting as Leo's father for 4 years meant I had established legal paternity regardless of biology. If I confronted her now, I'd lose everything. He told me to document everything, but not to do anything illegal. Every receipt, every email, every interaction. We scheduled weekly meetings, and he started building a counter case. I started keeping detailed records, every expense I covered for Leo, every preschool pickup, every doctor's appointment. I backed up all our joint financial records. For 6 months, I played the oblivious husband while collecting evidence. And Chloe had no idea. About 2 months in, something unexpected happened. Chloe's younger sister, Sarah, called me, crying, barely coherent. We met at a coffee shop, and she told me she'd accidentally seen text messages on Chloe's phone. She felt sick about it, but thought I deserved to know. Sarah had always been the good one in that family. She showed me screenshots, messages between Chloe and Justin going back years. They'd been involved since before Leo was born. The messages were explicit about Justin being Leo's biological father. But the truly damaging content came later. Messages where Chloe laid out her entire strategy. How she was waiting for my startup to hit certain revenue milestones. How she'd researched exactly what she'd be entitled to in a divorce. How Leo was her leverage because courts typically favor mothers. How she planned to maximize child support while she and Justin lived comfortably off my money. She even had a timeline, January, right after the holidays, when the business would be valued at its peak. Everything was calculated. Sarah gave me dates and conversations she'd overheard. She became my secret ally. When Chloe needed someone to watch Leo, Sarah would volunteer and quietly document things. Phone conversations Chloe had when she thought no one was listening. Times Justin came by the house. Everything Sarah witnessed. She reported back to David. The worst part was watching Chloe with Leo during those 6 months. She was a good mom. She loved him, took care of him. But I also knew from those messages that she saw him as an asset. She told Justin that having a child with my name on the birth certificate was the smartest strategic move she'd ever made. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my money or my business. I was fighting for Leo. Because I was the only father that kid had ever known. I'd been there for his first steps, his first words, every nightmare, and every triumph. And I wasn't going to let Chloe use him as a bargaining chip. By December, David and I had everything. 6 months of documentation, screenshots from Sarah proving the affair and the conspiracy, financial records showing Chloe had been moving money into a separate account, evidence that she'd consulted with divorce attorneys months earlier, detailed logs of my involvement in Leo's life, and Sarah willing to testify. David told me we had one of the strongest cases he'd ever seen, but we needed to wait for Chloe to make the first move. We needed her to announce her intent to give us legal standing to file immediately and aggressively. We prepared everything. The petition was written. The evidence was compiled. The custody motion was ready. All we needed was for Chloe to show her hand. Then she handed me that envelope at Christmas dinner. She'd made her move. She'd announced her intent to divorce in front of multiple witnesses. She'd revealed her entire plan, thinking I had no way to fight back. That night in the hotel, I gave David the green light. He filed everything electronically within the hour. The divorce petition with fraud allegations, all our evidence, an emergency motion for temporary custody. By morning, everything we'd spent 6 months preparing was officially in the court system. And Chloe was about to find out that underestimating someone doesn't just leave you vulnerable, it leaves you completely defenseless. The temporary custody hearing was set for 2 weeks after New Year's. Chloe showed up looking like she'd aged 10 years. Her lawyer was one of those guys who charges $500 an hour to look intimidating, but I could see the concern on his face the moment David started presenting our case. The judge was Judge Harper, known for having zero tolerance for parental manipulation. David had specifically requested her courtroom. She sat there with reading glasses perched on her nose, going through our documents, and her expression grew darker with every page. Chloe's lawyer tried to start with the standard approach, talking about maternal bonds, established routines, and how disruptive it would be for Leo to change his living situation. Judge Harper held up one hand and cut him off. She asked if he'd actually reviewed all the evidence. The lawyer stumbled through some answer about needing more time, and the judge's expression made it clear what she thought about that. Then David stood up and walked the court through our case. He started with the blood test that had triggered my concerns. Then the DNA results proving Leo wasn't biologically mine. He showed the timeline of the affair documented through Sarah's testimony and evidence going back 5 years. But the really damaging material came next. He presented messages where Chloe explicitly discussed using Leo as leverage, where she calculated child support based on my projected income, where she told Justin that her pregnancy was a strategic financial decision guaranteeing her a payout regardless of how the marriage ended. The judge asked to see those messages on the courtroom screen. David projected them, and I watched Chloe sink lower in her chair with each one. There was one message that made Judge Harper remove her glasses and stare directly at Chloe. From 8 months prior, where Chloe told Justin she was planning to reveal Leo's true paternity when he was older, timing it to cause me maximum emotional damage during divorce proceedings. She discussed using a 4-year-old child as a psychological weapon. The judge asked Chloe's lawyer if his client had any explanation. He requested a recess. The judge denied it and said she wanted to hear Chloe's explanation immediately. Chloe tried to claim the messages were taken out of context, that she'd been venting, that she never actually intended any of it, but David had documented a clear pattern spanning months. There was no way to reframe it. Then Sarah took the stand. She testified about conversations she'd overheard, about times she'd witnessed Justin at the house, about Chloe explicitly telling her she was waiting for my business to reach certain revenue targets before filing. Sarah was emotional through most of her testimony, at one point apologizing directly to me. The judge asked Sarah whether she believed Chloe's actions were in Leo's best interest. Sarah looked at her sister and said no. She said Chloe had been treating Leo like a financial asset and that witnessing it had been devastating. Chloe's lawyer attempted to discredit Sarah, suggesting she was biased or held some grudge. But Sarah had screenshots, specific dates, detailed accounts that corroborated everything David had presented. There was no question she was telling the truth. The judge took a 30-minute recess, and when she returned, her decision was written on her face. She started by saying this was one of the most calculated cases of parental fraud she'd encountered in 20 years on the bench. She said Chloe had deliberately deceived me, deliberately used a child as a financial instrument, and had demonstrated a pattern of behavior that raised serious concerns about her judgment as a parent. The ruling was comprehensive. I received temporary primary custody of Leo, pending a full hearing in 3 months. Chloe received supervised visitation for 4 hours per week at a family center where a social worker would be present. She was prohibited from discussing Leo's paternity with him without prior court approval. She was required to attend mandatory counseling. And if she violated any aspect of the custody order, her visitation would be suspended entirely. On the financial side, because I could demonstrate that the marriage had been based on fraudulent pretenses, the judge ruled that standard community property divisions wouldn't apply. Chloe would receive a minimal settlement, but nothing close to what she'd planned. No ongoing alimony. Since I had primary custody, I wouldn't be paying child support. And Justin would be required to submit to court-ordered paternity testing, which would establish him as the biological father and make him financially responsible. Everything Chloe had planned for years collapsed in a single 3-hour hearing. She tried to approach me after the ruling, mascara streaking down her face, saying she was sorry, asking if we could find some arrangement for Leo's sake. I looked at her the same way I'd looked at her at that Christmas dinner, with complete emotional detachment. I walked out of that courthouse and drove straight to pick up Leo from Sarah's house. When I walked in, Leo ran to me the way he always did, arms stretched out, calling for Daddy. I picked him up and held him close, and Sarah had tears in her eyes. She told me I was a good father and that Leo was fortunate to have me. Over the next few months, life gradually returned to something resembling normal. Leo adjusted better than I'd expected. He asked about his mom occasionally, and I kept my answers simple and age-appropriate. I never spoke negatively about Chloe to him. Never attempted to turn him against her. That wasn't the point. The full custody hearing 3 months later was almost anticlimactic. With everything already established and Chloe having violated the communication restrictions twice during supervised visits, the judge made the arrangement permanent. I had full legal and physical custody. Chloe's visitation remained supervised and limited. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I started dating again. Nothing serious initially, just coffee meetings and casual dinners. Then I met someone who actually valued honesty in relationships. Someone who met Leo and saw a kid, not a financial opportunity. Someone who understood what I'd been through and never once suggested I'd been foolish for not recognizing Chloe's scheme sooner. We moved slowly, but it felt genuine in a way my marriage never had. About a year after everything concluded, I encountered Chloe at a grocery store. She looked worn down, older, like the weight of her actions had finally settled on her. She attempted small talk, asked how Leo was doing, mentioned relocating out of state for a fresh start. I kept my responses brief. Before she walked away, she said she was sorry, genuinely sorry, that she destroyed everything and wished she could go back and make different choices. I believed she meant it. But I also understood that apologies don't undo years of calculated deception. Sorry doesn't return the time she stole. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that she'd been willing to destroy me for personal gain. I told her I hoped she found whatever she was looking for. And I genuinely meant it. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because I honestly didn't care anymore what happened to her. She wasn't part of my life anymore. She was just someone I used to know. That night, I put Leo to bed like always. He asked me to read his favorite book, the one about the bear who goes on adventures. Halfway through, he fell asleep with his hand holding mine. I sat there watching him breathe peacefully, thinking about how close I'd come to losing him. And I realized that Chloe had been right about one thing. Leo was the most important thing in my life. She'd just been completely wrong about how far I'd go to protect him. Given everything that happened, do you think I handled the situation with enough emotional restraint, or would you have reacted differently?